Yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to the last session of implementation of enterprise systems for this semester. Um, yeah, happy New Year to everyone who I haven't talked to yet. Today, yeah, we have a bit of, let's say, content that was still we couldn't cover last year that I think is important to talk about. Mainly, the topic will be what you see on this slide. So I briefly want to give you a wrap up on the topic of customizing. As you remember in, um, let's say in our discussion on the sub-activate methodology, that's in the uh, yeah, in the phase where we are basically doing the technical implementation. There we also have to do the configuration and customization. And that's what hopefully all of you did also in the learning item 5. So I'm assuming that, yeah, let's say most of it should be repetitive, at least because you've done it already. But I at least want to give you some background also in the lecture. Also with regard to what will be covered in the exam. As I said, you should mostly focus on that, what I'm discussing in the lecture. So that's gonna be uh, when we talk about customizing, mainly what I'm discussing here. There is a question in the chat. I'm not sure what you mean by Fragestunde, but this, so today we have this session, and at 2 p.m. we have another session. Um, exactly, and we're doing the customization part, and if there are questions, then I'm at the end of the lecture also available. So regarding some overarching questions, I didn't receive any questions that I could prepare or discuss upfront. Let's see what we have at the end ad hoc. But mostly what I wanna cover today is the customization part, and then I would like to talk a bit about the learning items, specifically about learning item 1 and 2. Sorry, learning item 1 and 3, so the ones where you had to read some papers and where you had to do some writing. Maybe also a status on that. So I'm mostly through with the grading on that one, on that part, but the learning item 5 is still in progress. So I'm hoping that I can release it to you this week. If not, then early next or mid of next week. Um, so on the questions regarding grades and so forth, I would like to postpone that to the end and exam discussion. Basically, we had that last time already, but we can cover that also at the end. I would like to focus now on the content regarding customization or customizing. Um, all right, so let's jump into it. I provided that slide deck also online, and I briefly wanted to do a wrap up there, what you basically did in learning item 5, and I'm mainly going to talk about the finance part. So I'm not covering really the material management part. Um, in the case study, this is basically reflected here on that slide. You have remember you had several phases. One of the phase 0 was the discussion before the implementation, where you also had to create a PowerPoint for that. And then you had to cover basically from the customization part, you had to cover phase 1, finance and material management. And what I want to talk about briefly, I just want to do a brief recap on the steps and maybe have a brief discussion. Let's see if that works online about optimization or customizing actually means. So if we're looking at the process steps, that is 100% reflected in your case study. We are first doing the the organizational structure, enterprise structure setup. Then we do process customizing, master data, and then we test basically our business processes. What I'm going to talk about a bit more detail today, and there I would like to, let's say, emphasize a few terms that you stumbled upon definitely in the configuration of the finance module. I will go into a bit more detail on that later. But before I do that, then I also have some, let's say, some recommendations on where to look up certain terms that I'm also then discussing later. But before I do that, I would like to briefly discuss what actually customization really means. Maybe it's a trivial question because you've now all done it. But when we think about it, and we contrast it with software engineering. So what are we actually really doing there? So maybe asking the question in the round, maybe someone on your side has an idea or an answer regarding customization. So what does that mean? What are we doing there? So just speak up, don't be shy if you have an answer.
We change certain settings or implement certain new things into an existing program to like match it to our needs, especially from our company.
Yes, so we change settings and we implement, but that goes in the right direction, and we match it to our company exactly. But if you would have to compare it with software engineering, so we're not writing any code, right? So what are we mainly doing? And how does it work technically? That's maybe I need to rephrase the question a bit. So I don't know if we go back to our programming courses, if you look at programming 3, where you're writing ABAP programs, you write function modules, you write classes, so you write actual ABAP code. We're not doing that here. However, we are still adjusting the system to our needs. But how does that work in the end then? There's an answer in the chat. Let's see. I don't want to stick too long with the mapping the company structure to an upload master data. Exactly. So basically, that's totally right. So both answers are totally right. Mapping the company structure to the system and uploading or configuring master data. But I just wanted to stress the point a bit. What is that actually technically? So when we look at the system, as I said, we're not writing any code. The question is, how are we customizing the system to our needs, and how so remember, we always talk about processes, and we say that basically there are already pre-existent processes in the system, and we can to some extent and here's the word again, customize them to our needs. But how does that really work? So what we are actually doing, and you realize that, and that's a bit of the, let's say, maybe annoying or a bit boring exercise of adding some data to some predefined screens. And with that, we are basically adding data to some, let's say, configuration tables, right? And that's what we are doing. And with this data, or we could also say it's keys that we are adding to the system. And we're talking more about those keys, at least some of them a bit later. So for example, the company code, or we are setting up a controlling area, we are setting up a chart of accounts, we're setting up accounts and so forth. So what we're doing there, we are basically just entering some data, some keys and number ranges into tables. And let's say the functionality for the processes or how the booking works on accounts and so forth, that is already defined, right? And that's the best practices that basically come with the system. And what we are just doing, we are just entering those key values. And based on those key values, pre-existing functionality, for example, function modules and so forth, just we'll use that data to Yeah, so that basically, yeah, we'll use that data. Maybe let's say in a simplified way, if you think about a process, in certain statements within our code. Let's say there's an if statement saying we have entered key X Y Z, and if key X Y Z has a certain value, we in the if statement go left, or we in the if statement go right in the process. So that's basically what we are doing. So that's the main idea of this customization. So functionality is basically already there. All the code is there. Millions of lines of code are already in the system, and we are just adding some, let's say, configuration keys, some number ranges that would then decide how this functionality in detail works. And one of those things we have to add is obviously our organizational structure, in order to reflect that our organization in the system. And that's the main, let's say, the main difference when we talk about now standard software here, as opposed to custom-made software. So we are not writing any code, and this is also what SAP means when they are saying they want the clean core, and they want you to take the standard of the system. They don't want you to write any let's say additional functionalities, any additional classes within the in the system. And then and this is maybe a bit also the background why this let's say this task of configuring is a bit might look a bit annoying and a bit boring. But the challenging or the interesting part really is to understand how the your company works and how that needs to be reflected within the system. So mapping those requirements onto the system functionalities. And there's basically, I would say, three main challenges in that area. So one is that you basically need to understand what the business background is, or the business meaning. So we're going to talk later a bit about those terms in the finance module. So about external accounting, managerial accounting, controlling. And that's really important. So if you want to be an expert there, you need to understand how basically accounting works. And then you need to understand how those terms and how those concepts of accounting are actually mapped to those SAP terms and concepts, right? And how is that, let's say, the functionality of accounting represented in the system? And then the third challenge is really to configure and set the keys and values in those tables that I mentioned in a way that this fits to what you need in your company. So those I would say are the main challenges. It's not really about and that is a bit misleading in those in this configuration. Let's say uh, case study you did, that you have a that you have to open some screens and enter some data. So obviously that is looks really trivial. But the 3 points I just mentioned, that's the challenge, and that's also, let's say, the interesting part. And let me also say this. Obviously, after you've done that now, a learning item 5, you're not yet an expert, obviously, right? You've seen that it's really complex. So if you imagine that we have millions of lines of code. We have 20,000 tables. A lot of them are configuration tables in the system. And then obviously we need to understand how the business concepts work and how that is translated into keys so that we can modify the processes in the system. You need to have some experience, and you need to be kind of an expert to be really good at that. So what we can, or at least what I could offer now in this course, is actually that you get a first insight, but don't be disappointed if you're not an expert yet, right? So what I just wanted to, or the point I just wanted to make is that it's quite complex. Although let's say this case study is a bit prescriptive, right? So what wouldn't work is that I say to you, okay, please. Here's the system, go ahead and configure the finance module. That just doesn't work, and that's why we have those um, case studies. All right, so that's an important point I wanted to make, a brief discussion I wanted to have what customization and customizing actually means. Regarding the, let's say, the complexity and the understanding of the terms, I just wanted to give you also as a bit of support for preparing the exam, two more, let's say, sources where you can look up certain terms. Obviously, the first one you probably know already. It's the SAP help. So let me see. It's this, right? And here you can obviously search for terms. I've just searched here now for the term client, and there you get a detailed description of what the term client means. So that's one source, and I provided another source, and I would see this as complement. So complementing what I'm going to discuss next. I've provided a glossary, and this glossary basically contains an English and a German description of the most important terms of the configuration case study. However, you don't have to memorize, obviously, all of those terms. Maybe just focus on those that I'm highlighting today. Okay. We talked about the concept of customization, and it's actually relatively simple from if we only look at what we are doing there. But the task itself, so doing those three steps, understanding the business, understanding the SAP system, and then configuring it in a way in the third step with keys, so that my company is reflected, my business is reflected in the system, is quite complex. And now I would like to, as I said, highlight a few terms, and I will focus mainly, because that's where we start in the configuration, on the organizational on terms of organizational structure. There's a question. Okay, so some more questions on the exam. So as I said, the grades for the let's say the practical part for the group works end of this week, latest mid of next week. So in time, at least 1 week before your exam. All right, back to topic. Yeah, so talking about these terms, so mainly about the finance module, so phase 1 of your case study, and I would like to do that in the Miro board and highlight a few of the most important terms. So as I said, it shouldn't be completely new to you. Some of the terms I've already also discussed briefly in the lecture, but let's just highlight a few terms and how they are related here on that board. As a side note, again, so what you all those terms I'm discussing here, you will also find them in the SAP glossary that I uploaded. Okay. So where everything starts, and that's everyone basically who has taken this course and who has taken programming should know that, or yeah, someone that has logged into an SAP system probably also. So first term is the client. And obviously we are using our system is S31, and our client is 326. And obviously what we have several clients within a system. I'm not sure how many clients the Technische Hochschule Munich or the sorry, Technical University Munich has in their system, but we are obviously using client 326. So there's quite a few in there, I'm assuming. And the client is basically, you could say it's an independent environment. And if we think about a company, this would also be, let's say, a commercially independent entity. So if we take BMW again, they probably have different clients for their different subsidiaries. And this the client would also mean that it's organizationally and data-wise separated. So it has basically its own tables and its own master data. So each client has tables and master data. Some tables, let's say, are cross client. One example that I can imagine or just now think of is the transaction codes. So if we think about SE80 or all the other different transactions that we find in the system, they are obviously also maintained in a table. This is obviously cross-client because it's not only specific to one client. So that's the client. And then what we basically find when we think about FE, so the finance module, let's just write that down here. Talking about finance, we basically have two different, yeah, we could say two different types of accounting. We briefly discussed that also in the lecture. You probably also know it from your finance courses. We have external accounting. So that's one thing. And then we have in German, this is often referred to as controlling. In the, let's say, in the English speaking sphere, it's more often referred to as managerial accounting. So that's the two parts we have. And what we basically find, or the yeah first important, or after the client, the second important concept that we need is the so-called in order to implement external and managerial accounting, we need the company code. And there we always have a between client and company code, we have a one to many relationship. So we can obviously have n company codes within a client, but one company code always refers to one client, obviously. So it's not cross system or respectively cross client. When we look at that picture up here, we find two company codes, and I believe it's the US one that you had to configure in the case study. Okay, company code. So we have what we have here is we have US. And we have Germany, Deutschland. And the US one you had to basically configure in the system. Now, when we look first at the right-hand side at the external accounting, we have one important concept that you should have stumbled upon in the configuration, and that's the ledger. And basically the ledger consists of different, it contains different elements, you could say. Mostly it's, or what it is supposed to capture is transaction data. Transaction data. So basically each, let's say each movement in the system somehow, and I've said that also in the lecture, one of the previous lectures already, each movement obviously needs to be represented financially somehow. So if I am delivering a finished good to a customer, or if I am procuring some material, raw material. These are all transactions or movements in my company that need to be represented financially, right? Um, and that's what basically the ledger is for. There's another term actually mentioned in that or relevant in that context, and that's you know that from accounting, I hope. That's the journal. And ledger basically stores the financial transaction data based on accounts, general ledger accounts. And the journal has a sequential or chronological, it captures those transactions chronologically or from a time perspective. So what do we have in here? We have transaction data, so-called, and this is always based on so-called documents in the SAP system. In German, it's the more, it's a very prominent term, Buchungsbelege. So in English, it's just called, it's just named documents. In German, it's Buchungsbelege, if you ever hear that term. And then what we also have associated to the ledger is the accounting rules. And here I basically haven't really talked about external accounting yet. I've mentioned it already. I mean, external accounting, as the word says, is for external stakeholders, so regulatory authorities, shareholders, and so forth, that are interested in the performance of the company and that would like to understand how well the company is performing. And in order to make, let's say, the products of external accounting, which are basically the balance sheet and the income statement. To make them comparable between companies, we need to follow certain accounting rules. So you probably know that from your accounting courses better than me. And there's different standards for that, and that is obviously also reflected here in the ledger. And one of the standards is the International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, and the German one is Handelsgesetzbuch, HGB. So those are different accounting rules that we need to be configured in here, and that we would have to select. Then what we're also doing here, we can obviously set up ledgers for different currencies to have the accounting in for different countries and different currencies. And what we can also set up here are the booking periods. So some of you had a bit of trouble with the booking period. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. That certain general ledger account bookings, so financial movements, need to be they need to be included into a certain period, and this period is also predefined in the system, and it's obviously rolling, moving forward. And that is something we haven't really set up in our system. That's why some of you guys had a problem with, they wanted to book, I believe, in January, but the booking period was still in December because we didn't roll the booking period forward in the system. For booking periods, and then according or basically as the next important element that belongs to the ledger, we have the so-called chart of accounts. And we're talking about general ledger accounts here, not about bank accounts. So Hauptbuchkonten in German. And yeah, basically each ledger is associated with a chart of accounts, and on these accounts, as I said before, we are booking the different transactions, and there we obviously have different accounts. So we have on the one hand side the so-called balance sheet accounts. And they are subdivided into assets and liabilities, or asset and liability accounts. And obviously this is related to our balance sheet, right? So those balance sheet accounts, and this is nice in English, actually, they're called, or they're named balance sheet accounts. In German, they are, the name is Bestandskonten, which is a bit less intuitive, but they are basically used to track or record all the transactions that are then relevant for creating the balance sheet. And the balance sheet is obviously, as you know, subdivided into assets and liabilities. And examples for that would be for asset for asset accounts. We would have a bank, or we would have inventory, and so forth. And for liability accounts, we would have equity and liabilities, for example. So that's one type of accounts that we have, and basically you had to set this all up. Remember that this screen where some of you also had problems, where you just copied the chart of accounts basically from a template, and that's obviously quite helpful if you don't have to do that really from scratch. Because as you can imagine, the accounts you need for normal for most of the companies are quite similar. Because obviously we also, if you're talking about external accounting, we have to adhere to some accounting rules. And all those accounts are basically then aggregated into certain positions in the income, in the balance sheet. This is relatively or standard for most of the companies. And then what we also have, and this basically moves into or is connected to the income statement, we have P&L accounts. And as I said, they are related to the income statement. And here we have expenses and revenue. Write a bit more readable. Revenue. Okay, so that's that. And remember, in the let's say basically when you were testing your configuration in the last step of phase 1 of the configuration case study, you had to book, I believe, rent to bank. So a rental payment. And what we had there is basically we have an expense account. So expense rent is an expense account. And bank is an asset account. So this booking would then, on the right-hand side, this bank booking would then affect the balance sheet, and this would also affect the income statement. So that's, yeah, more or less the nutshell. I would say, obviously, there's a few more things you need to configure in the system, because here we are, in the system, in the 3 different steps that I talked about. So in the organizational structures, master data and processes. But this is it in a nutshell, basically. Then looking at the left-hand side, looking at the managerial accounting. So the purpose of managerial accounting is to understand how well your company is performing, not with regard to some accounting standards, but more and not interesting or interest or targeted towards stakeholders that are external parties, but more related to management and internal parties. And you're always interested in, you could say that the profitability. So are we earning money? You see that to some extent also in the, obviously in the income statement, but you're more flexible here, right? And you can break it down to certain products and so forth. So it's more, probably also more detailed. What do we need here to set this up? So we're always, again, here starting at the company code. And then we have the so-called controlling area. Controlling area. In German, it's the Kostenrechnungskreis. And it's basically a unit, organization unit within a company used to represent the cost accounting. So obviously we are interested in how much money we are spending basically on different activities. So let's say in the value chain, in the product creation, manufacturing, whatever process, in our administration and so forth, we want to know, okay, how much money are we spending on that? Always, again, then with the objective to be able to say, is this too much money? Are we having too high costs? Do we have to reduce certain areas and so forth? So that's the main purpose here. Looking at our picture, we find the controlling area here for North America and for Europe. So that would be, in that case, North America and EU. Yeah, basically, that's the core idea, that we want to do cost accounting. And for cost accounting, we need certain, again, organizational units to identify where costs are coming from, and that's our cost centers. And I forgot basically what we have, a relationship between company code and controlling area. It's actually 1 to n. So a controlling area always needs to the company code is always assigned to one controlling area. A controlling area can cover more than one company code. In our example here, we have a one-to-one relationship. So company code DE is associated with Europe, US with North America. Actually, we also have here the chart of accounts. Maybe I should also add that here. So down here, we have chart of accounts. That's here GL ##. Just added that down here and forgot that. Okay, so managerial accounting controlling area, cost centers. And cost centers are an organizational unit within the controlling area that define a certain location of cost incurrence. So you could say, maybe that's a bit too big, but it's easily imaginable. It's a plant, or we could say it's maybe it's the sales department, or so forth, right? Okay, cost centers. And obviously we have an association here between cost centers always assigned to exactly one controlling area, and it can be related to n cost centers and belong to a controlling area, which makes sense, I guess. And cost centers are basically, and that's also was an area where you had some troubles, are created or summarized in the standard hierarchy. Let me just add here for that. So profitability, I mean, I guess you know that, but it's always here cost versus revenue. So standard hierarchy. Then associated to our cost centers. And that was a bit, there was also one question I remember about the cost centers, respectively, the next term. I'm discussing the cost elements, because I think the structure changed a bit on the IMG, where to create those elements. So cost elements. And this, I think, is a bit better described in when I look at the German term. In German, this means Kostenart, and if I translate that word by word, I would say it's the type of costs, which makes, I think, from my perspective, a lot of sense. So what this does, it tries to classify the valued consumption of production factors. So if we think about our bikes that we are creating in our case company, then we have certain parts for our bike. Those bikes have those parts have certain costs associated. And when we are consuming, so we could say that the type of cost that is associated here, or the cost element, is material. Right? So that's one type. Another one, when we are producing our bikes, we have personnel involved. Energy, and so forth. And obviously, by trying to allocate those costs to different cost elements, respectively cost types, we are trying to identify, okay, where are our main cost drivers coming from, and are there areas where we could save money. There's another term often used in that context, and that's the primary versus secondary costs. And primary would mean we can directly associate it to the product we are creating, mostly. So for our bike, this material would be a primary cost element. A secondary one would be um, the, the rental costs for the building, because we cannot directly assign that cost to one product. We would have to actually distribute it somehow. So that's to a large part the idea of the controlling part that we set up. So we are trying to track the costs, obviously. And there's a few things, a few terms I forgot that are probably, yeah, a bit less relevant here, but are also mentioned or used. So we have, for example, here the business area bikes term, and business area would be linked to our client. It's basically on the client level. And a business area is basically used to, again, it's an organizational unit, and it's trying to identify a certain, let's say, area of operations or responsibilities of our company that we want to track financially. And for that, we would also create, let's say, our own reporting, our own balance sheet or income statement. So in our example, so it's probably easier to understand when we use the example, it would be bikes, obviously. So if we are assuming that our global bike company not only sells bikes, but maybe also motorcycles or e-bikes or whatever, and then we could say we are having different business areas for that, and we want to track actually how successful those different business areas are. And that's the purpose of uh, the business area here. Yeah. And in our case, this is BI hashtag. And let me see, did I forget another one? Yeah, on the client level, we also have the credit control area. So I would say from the concepts that we just discussed, this is the least important one. And what it does, it's also again an organizational unit, and it's responsible for making loans to customers. So there we could set up uh, yeah, how much how much of a credit line we would offer to our customers, to certain customers. And I forgot one more thing here on the associated basically to the controlling area. And that's also mentioned here. It's the last term here on that picture. It's the operating concern. And I'm putting that down here. Operating concern. Das ist hardly readable. Operating concern. And the operating concern is used in controlling basically in German it's basically Ergebnisbereich, and it's used to represent the what basically what I just discussed before. It's in that case related to the business area. So the operating concern would try to track the profitability of certain areas of our company. For example, yeah, for certain countries, for distribution channels, for market segments, and so forth. So with the operating concern, we can actually set that up and track the profitability for certain areas. So it's actually, I probably need a new pen here. They're giving me a hard time. Like profitability, e.g. for different customer groups. Okay, so it's a bit, hope you can read all that. I'm uploading that and trying to fix some areas that are maybe a bit hard to read. And if you have questions, obviously, or you cannot read it, then just drop me a message. So that's basically the key terms I wanted to discuss here, also in order to explain that picture here, which is in your slides and in the case study. Any immediate questions on that? So you should have at least discovered most of those terms, but you probably didn't pay a lot of attention when you did the case study, which is totally normal. And that's why I wanted to discuss those in a bit more detail in the, let's say, in the business context. What do they actually mean in the finance module? If there are questions, then just let me know. What I would like to do now. So this is basically was the first step in the finance configuration. The next, configuring the org structure. The next step, and this is a bit different, let's say, for the finance module, because this is not really, you could say this is not really a process what you are configuring here in material management. Actually, we need to set up the different, you could say the different steps in our process. But here it's mostly about defining certain number ranges. So here account groups, then other number ranges for controlling, and those tolerance groups to set certain limits. So how much can I actually book as a on different accounts depending on the transaction that I have and so forth. So that's configuring finance process step. That's what you also did. You had some problems there. If I'm not mistaken, there were some problems on with the bookings on the general ledger accounts because I believe some of those settings were not set up properly. Then the master data, obviously, there you had I had quite some messages that you sent. So setting up the general ledger accounts from that template, setting up the cost center hierarchy with the Excel template you got, or that Excel sheet. That's a bit, I know it's a bit annoying, but basically this is what you have to do. Then setting up the cost elements. I believe that was mostly pre-configured already. And then costs, so grouping together certain cost centers. And the posting period I already discussed before. And then the testing of the process mostly was doing some bookings on general ledger accounts. As I said before, the booking of the rent to the bank. So that's basically, in a nutshell, the core customization activities of phase one of the case study with the most important terms. Questions? So except those you already posted regarding the exam. So maybe to say that again, focus on what I've discussed in the lecture. I'm not asking for all the terms that are in the glossary, but use the glossary maybe as a help to study those terms and better understand what they mean. I'm also uploading the picture here, and then you should be fine. Okay, then let's see. Next step, I wanted to briefly talk about the learning items. Yeah. So as I said, I mostly went through that already, through most of your solutions. And what I did, I just picked one or two uh, solutions that I found quite good. Doesn't mean that if you did it slightly differently, you cannot get the full points. I just wanted. I also don't want to go into every detail. We don't have the time for that. And that's why I'm also uploading those, let's say, those student examples afterwards. If you have then individual questions, you can then also approach me for the exam review time slot, and then we can discuss that in detail, or we make a separate appointment. For now, I just wanted to give you some idea on how I graded that to some extent, or what I've found good solutions, and to give you an idea of what I was expecting. And the same for learning item 3. Let's see how far we get. Yeah, should be enough time, I hope. Um, yeah, let me just need to switch my screen. Okay, so let's just, since we don't have much time, I've now opened a few. So I'm trying also to hide the groups, but it's in the end, I mean, it's a good thing if I'm showing that those are good solutions. But I'm trying to make it anonymous. Let's see. Um, yeah, let's maybe just pick that one. So what obviously what was the expectation that you read the different the different papers and you the questions. Learning item 1. Okay, so first question was related to the past, putting enterprise system in putting the enterprise into the system. Why should companies think critically about advantages, disadvantages, and risks of enterprise systems? Argue a bit, name main advantages and risks, and support your explanations with examples. The second part was how does the social technical, so what is it at all, the social technical view? Then how would that change the, um, the cases that you picked? So how would a social technical view have helped them? Then there is for HANA overview. So there I was very yeah, I mostly wanted to see, okay, how would you differentiate tailor-made software from standard software? And then here I wanted to see the BMC, basically the discussion on the BMC. Um, How did I grade? I basically I only had to award 15 points. So what I had, I did award I believe 9 points for the content, 3 points um, for the form, right? So that it was in a way that it was readable and nicely formatted and so forth. And I also awarded points, 3 points for the effort. So if I could see that students had really spent a lot of effort into the work, and yeah, I awarded additional points. Um, so what I like basically on this one, this is now in German, obviously, but this is really nice. So most of you didn't really, most of the groups didn't do an agenda or a content overview. This is also not mandatory. It's not required, but it's quite nice. Also, what I found out, so that's the formal part, let's say. Most of you didn't put any page numbers really. Most groups didn't do that. So this group was really one of the few. So just that's easy stuff, right? If you if you put if you have several pages, put page numbers, right? That's uh, standard. You need to do that. What I liked here is that they really I mean, they had different chapters for the different parts. So they had an introduction on the topic. They also even they cited this was not mandatory at all, but that's why I said this is extraordinary solution, I would say, because they also even cited where they got the different uh, uh, statements from. So that's really nice. And then here it's a differentiation of the different advantages of enterprise systems, then risks. So here also the source is mentioned. That's really nice. And so quite, and it was even written in a way that that it's like a paper, right? So it's the different elements fit together. Here it talks about, so that's the second question, talking about um, how enterprise systems were reconceptualized. So this basically the discussion about the OIT model, so quite elaborate here. And then also some discussion on the BMW case. So that was quite nice. Here, discussion on tailor-made versus S4HANA. So first the discussion and then the comparing table. So that's quite nice. So obviously this, but I wasn't very strict there. I mean, I would have liked to see some really focus on S4HANA, not just picking the table from with standard versus tailor-made software from the lecture. So adding some content, let's say, from that S4HANA paper would have been nice. And then the intelligent enterprise systems here, really the discussion on the with an example, I believe here it's McDonald's discussion on the different dimensions of the BMC and how intelligent enterprise systems. So first of all, discussion, what are intelligent enterprise systems and how would those affect the BMC, and then a handwritten, which is totally fine, version of the BMC. So that's let's say really in a nutshell, quite nice, and it's quite elaborate. So it's 10 pages. So I would on the effort side, I would award points here, or awarded points, and obviously also the content covers everything really nicely, and the students spend a lot of effort on that, assumingly. So that's this part. But let's say in general, there was, I believe, no group who really didn't cover the topic. And I know let's just make that as a disclaimer. Obviously, I know you can nowadays. And I'm not I don't want to, yeah, I don't know, make a change the assignment because you can actually use AI. Because in the end, what I think what you should do here, if you're just, I don't know, make a summary of the papers and then ask AI to generate a solution, that probably works. But in the end, you're losing the time because you're not preparing for the exam, because all this content is also relevant for the exam. So it's actually a win-win situation. So you study and you get extra points. So I would always see that as a benefit. But let's say I didn't grade in a way that I said, okay, this was was probably AI generated and I deducted points. So I just mainly looked at the three aspects I just mentioned. And if that was all good, then I gave the points. And most of the groups had um, between 10 and 15 points. So all good. Question 3, I think that one is a bit more interesting because it allows for a bit more creativity. And honestly, as compared to last semester or last year, the solutions here were really quite nice. So let me just pick. So most of you guys again got most of the points. Mm. Oh, there's questions. Okay, let's answer the questions first. Uh, yeah, a sample exam has been provided. Only one of the group had to submit. Yes, exactly. So if I got one solution from the group, that's fine. Learning items, as I said, learning items can be part of. I mean that content can be part of the exam, definitely. Yes. Um, yeah. Yeah. So that I guess that answers all the questions. If not, you can also speak up. That makes it easier. So I don't have to. Can have a discussion. Okay, so I'm just need to switch my screen real quick. Learning item 3. Yeah, so there it's a bit just to say what the points were that I was looking for. So this is obviously there's a lot of degrees of freedom on what you do and what you leave and so forth. But I would say this is a good example that goes into the really right direction. So you have those different phases, and what I looked at is that obviously the sequence from left to right, and then always the sequence from top to bottom associated with the levels makes sense. So I checked that. Plus, what I was always looking for is that your terms you're mentioning in the phases here is allocated or easily allocatable in the table. So in that case, so for example, business case can be identified easily here. It's the first term. Second one is scope goal definition. That's really nice, right? So there's a clear mapping. That's important, even although there's this phase level assignment. So what I didn't like or what I don't like is if you have here terms listed that you cannot find here and vice versa. That's not good, right? What you can always do is that you have an aggregated, let's say, aggregate term here that you find also here, and then maybe you have broken it down further here somehow. That's also possible. But somehow there needs to be a clear mapping between the phase model and the table. Then the students also worked on the synonyms here. Most of them, as I remember, were totally correct or clear to me. And then they evaluated, is this a critical success factor and why? So that's perfect. Very good solution. Yeah, and it's also quite elaborate. So they didn't just mention 3 points and then they were done. Oh, and they even added, okay, that's also very good. They even added a brief description or guideline on how to understand that. So that's perfectly fine. The only thing I would have liked probably were page numbers. Yeah, but that just keep that in mind. It doesn't hurt to add page numbers, even if it's only 3 pages. Yeah. Okay, so that's that one. Any questions on this? Okay. Um, learning item, since we still have a bit of time, learning item 4. There it's slightly different. What I'm going to provide you, I make it available now in Moodle. Oh, there's a question. When will we receive the points for the learning items? So as I said, I'm mostly done with assignments, learning items 1 through 4. Um, and I'm trying to finish 5 till end of the week. The latest will be mid of next week, and then because I would like to give you the full result, not any intermediary results. And I think that should still be fine. You have it 1 week before the exam. You know where you're standing. And let's say from what I've created so far, except you haven't participated, but all of you who submitted something um, did quite well. So yeah, in the range from, I guess the worst was probably would be in the 3.0 range, but I don't remember if there was any. So rather 2 or 1.0 in that direction. So from maybe 2.7 to 1.0, I would expect. So no really bad grades so far. Um, but you get the points, as I said, end of the week or latest mid of next week. Mm, yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to show you is this. Ah, okay. No, that's not it. That's not it. The wrong one. Yeah. So what I did, I did a let's see, we need the English version. I did a presentation myself, and obviously what I was looking for there is obviously that you did the analysis properly, so you covered the problems, um, and you from that derived the proper. Let's maybe look at the question again. Mm, scenario. Uh, yeah, that's the one. So okay, so what I was looking at, obviously, if you did properly the analysis, if you find the proper problems, and did suggest proper solutions for the problems based on the S/4HANA system, and then I also graded if you had some proper project plan not really detailed, but at least some phases and a project structure organization. And what is important, what I found important is also that it was clear that the that you're presenting for the global bike board. So it needs to have some form and it needs to have it needs to be crisp and to the point to some extent, right? So you at the beginning you should have some maybe some management summary and so forth, right? To give the board some guidance, because those guys are obviously they don't have a lot of time. So that's a criteria I was looking at, and to show you how that looked like, or what I could have imagined as a solution. I have one from that I've created in the past myself. So there I had basically one that's this kind of management summary slide where I'm saying, okay, what did we actually do and what are we trying to achieve, right? So why are we looking at that? So why do we present to the board? What you could also do, I didn't do that really. If you're really doing a presentation for the board, you can also have a slide at the end, but I didn't create that. But you could have that that says, okay, please, dear board, dear CEO, sign off on the next step for the project, so that we can set up a project team and so forth, so that they basically make the budget available. But this was not mandatory. So this is kind of like a management summary. And what I always use, so that I know, basically from practice, that you always have speaking action titles. So they are already, there's a statement that defines or says what the slide is trying to achieve. This I was not grading. This is just a recommendation maybe for future presentations you're going to create in such a context where you could do that. That way. And then what you always try to do is that you do nice presentations, obviously. I mean, if you're really in a corporate setting, there's quite a few people working on such a presentation for the top management, right? So this is they're putting some effort into that. That's why it always should look quite nice. Yeah, because they're spending a lot of effort on the content and on the presentation, because the expectation is that it also is solid and looks quite good also, content wise and graphically, structure wise, and so forth. Then I had here the detailed problems. I tried to show, okay, we have the problems in the process of material management and finance, and I tried to really write down the details. This is also a slide that you could maybe put into the backup if it's too detailed, because the CEO would probably not look at that. Then this is more of something that you could show. There's a that needs to be English. So summary of problems. This tries to really summarize what the problems are. So inefficient integrated processes, lack of IT support, and so forth. So that's a really good slide for top management, I would say. And then this is also not mandatory, but I was trying to really boil it down to the root cause of where does the main problem come from, and that's the lack of IT support. Right? So this is these problems in a logical chain, you could say, and then recommendation that an ERP system would probably help to solve the problems. What are the benefits of an ERP system that we would introduce in a nutshell? And then rough project plan. I mean, these months up here, so the time periods are just a rough guess at the beginning, right? You don't really know that. So what I would do if I was the project manager, I would just do that, and then I would talk to the different stakeholders, so the vendor, some other guys who have experience, and I would try to make that a bit more solid and challenge it. But as a first draft, that's probably fine. And these activities that you find on that slide, I mean, you've done that basically in learning item 3. So that shouldn't be too difficult. And yeah, and then I also added an org chart for the project team. So you have a steering committee, so someone from the C-level, from the top management on such a project. Then someone a bit below that who would give the money. And then you have a project lead, and then you have some guys from the vendor, from consulting, and then you have people from IT and from the different business departments. And yeah, that is something. So org chart like this, I've seen many times in practice. And very often, what you find is that you obviously have, if you're talking about a project lead, you have someone from the vendor, an external guy and an internal guy, or you maybe have someone from the business and one from the IT department. That depends a bit. But this is roughly what you could expect. But as I said, I'm not really focusing too much on how it looks. If you analyze the problems properly and you have all the parts covered that were asked in the question. There is a question in the chat. Would the team that did not complete the learning item file receive a grade for that part? Yes. So you get reduced points. But depends on how much you did. So if you just created the company code, then you probably won't get a lot of points. If you had some problems at the end with testing the material management processes, then it will only have minor effect, right? Because you've done most of the work. So that was a question again on learning item 5. On learning item 4, any questions? So what I've seen there, also all good. No groups that really completely failed that learning item. I wasn't expecting that, but yeah. Okay, then if there are no questions on that, are there any, let's say, we can spend a bit of more time. I still have time. Any questions that you would like to address right now, maybe general regarding the exam that I missed before? And there was one. I have a question regarding our 50%. Will we get the grade before the, yes. And the cheat sheet allowed to print the cheat sheet on paper, yes. No, you don't have to write the cheat sheet by hand. You don't. Any other questions in that direction or any other? So if I'm not mistaken, it's the exam is on the 22nd, right? 1:30 in the Alte Mensa. So still 2 weeks to go. You can make the cheat sheet on the iPad, yes.